Chapter 1879 Northwest Spring. Li Changgong was in a terrible mood in recent times. It was because he had heard that chaos from the Jiangnan region had won several more great battles in Fremons. He had become a well-known powerhouse all over the world, not to mention that he had become powerful once again. This made Li Changgong, who had lost at the hands of Zhang Yi in the first place and had been hoping to avenge his shame one day, feel more and more hopeful. If only I had led my troops there in the first place. Li Changgong rubbed his temples and was in a terrible mood. The gap between him and Zhang Yi was getting wider and wider, and he was afraid that if he faced off again now, Zhang Yi would be able to kill him in seconds with a direct strike. But it was already too late to regret. Nowadays, the world did not know what had changed. Only know that after Chernobyl, the whole world, one after another, began to appear more mutants. The quantity and quality of mutants is the root of a powerful force. Li Changgong, more and more, began to feel anxious about managing the Northwest region. His position hadn't come about in a bright and honorable way. Shortly after the end of the world, he had relied on his strong military force to force the then supreme commander of the region, Jing Yongxiu, to step down. However, the old commander was extremely prestigious in the Northwest region's military. Although he stepped down, there were many of his old men in the army, and most of them held important positions. If Li Changgong wanted to manage the Northwest region well, he had to utilize their strength. Over the past 3 years, he had purged some of his old ministers and tried to install his inner circle in various key departments. However, he was still unable to completely purge the so-called remnants of the previous dynasty. Why is he still able to control the Northwest region? Isn't it because he is an epsilon powerhouse? Even though there were people in the Northwest region who were dissatisfied with him, who could replace him and guard the tens of millions of people here? But now, the situation was different again. More and more mutants began to appear. Sha Liu, the mortal war god among the 5 extreme gods of war, had even been similarly promoted to epsilon. His worries grew heavier and heavier. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking on the door resounded outside. Li Changgong gathered his emotions and sat behind his desk with a majestic look. Come in. The person who walked in was a youth with slightly long hair and an indifferent expression. The second-generation Sky War god, Baizhan. He was also the beloved of Li Changgong, who had been promoted single-handedly. Commander, according to your orders, Sha Liu has been brought here. Baizhan said as he stepped aside, and behind him, Sha Liu walked to the front and respectfully performed a standard military salute. Captain of the 5 extreme gods of war, mortal war god Sha Liu has come to report for duty. Please instruct the commander. Li Changgong raised his eyes and stared at Sha Liu. His gaze was so deep that Sha Liu hurriedly lowered his head, not daring to meet his eyes. Li Changgong leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms on the table. After a while, he said, Sha Liu, how long have you been a soldier? Sha Liu hurriedly replied, I enlisted in 43, and this year is already my 10th year in the military. Li Changgong nodded. That's also a very old veteran. You've worked hard all these years protecting your family and defending your country, and I'm very grateful for your dedication. But as a soldier, it's all about standing up when the country and the people are in need. Right? Comrade Sha Liu? Sha Liu's heart vaguely felt something bad, but he still honestly said, That's right, Commander. For the sake of the country and the people, I am willing to give everything. Li Changgong smiled as he picked up a document and threw it in front of him. Very well, now there is such a daunting task. Looking at the entire Northwest region, I think only you are capable of it. Sha Liu walked slowly to the desk and picked up the document. Li Changgong gestured for him to take a look before Sha Liu opened the document. It was clearly a transfer order to transfer Sha Liu to the northernmost part of the Northwest region, which was adjacent to Fremont, to the northernmost part of the Northwest region, adjacent to Ebony Town. The Northwest region was very large, and it was more than 2,000 kilometers from Chang'an to the northernmost Ebony Town. One must realize that this distance was almost as fast as Chang'an to Tianhai City. This was heck of a banishment. There was a lack of supplies, extreme cold, and one had to face Fremons in the north, while in the west one had to be on guard against the harassment of those chaotic mutant forces in the Middle East region at all times. It was a total drudgery. Sha Liu's hesitation fell in Li Changgong's eyes as he raised his eyelids and asked in a dissatisfied tone, "What's wrong, Major General Sha Liu? Are you dissatisfied with this transfer order in any way?" Sha Liu's facial muscles twitched twice, and he hurriedly said in a loud voice, "How could I, Commander? I will strictly follow your orders." Li Changgong said indifferently, "It's not following my orders, it's following the call of the region and the people." "Yes." Sha Liu took the transfer order book and gave a serious salute before turning around and leaving the office. After he left, Baijan asked, "Commander, do you think Sha Liu will obediently head to Ebony Town to take up his post?" Li Changgong sneered. "Do you think he can afford the consequences of disobeying military orders?" Baijan expressed his intention and stopped speaking. It was true that Sha Liu was an epsilon, but ordinary people wouldn't even understand how big the gap between epsilons could be. Nowadays, Li Changgong was already a mutant with a black chariot level and an ability index of 23,000 points. He had the best resources in the entire region. And Sha Liu? Certainly also a genius, his talent might not be below Li Changgong. But he didn't have too many resources and had to be scorned by Li Changgong, so now he was just a white chariot with a supernatural ability index of 15,000 points. If Sha Liu dared to be insubordinate, Li Changgong could take him out in name only. For this transfer order, Li Changgong was prepared for Sha Liu to disobey the military order. But he didn't care in the slightest. Li Changgong pointed at Baijan and said, "Starting today, every day, on a daily basis, the entire region, everyone will be tested. Once a mutant who exhibits a talent above the Delta level is found, he must be sent to Chang'an City immediately. In absolute, the Northwest region must not be allowed to have the existence of anyone who threaten his rule." "Yes, Commander," Baijan said. Sha Liu left the military department. The wind and snow were still outside, the Northwest region was exceptionally cold, and not many pedestrians could be seen on the roads outside. Although the current technology was advancing rapidly, underground fortresses had been created in extremely cold environments, which could allow even ordinary people to live. But above ground in the city, almost only military personnel as well as special staff could be seen. Sha Liu's military boots stepped on the snow, and there was only a thin layer of snow on the road that had been cleared just a few hours ago. He left 2 lines of footprints on the empty streets, and instead of taking a car, he just walked back to his residence. Vaguely, along with the wind, noisy voices came from the corner of the street. "Let me go, what are you going to do?" "I'm a second lieutenant, I've performed feats for the region, I've put my life on the line for the commander, you can't do this to me." Sha Liu narrowed his eyes and turned his head to look, and saw that at the doors of an office building of the military department, several heavily armed soldiers escorted a young soldier with a flat head out, and without a second thought, stuffed him inside a military vehicle. Sha Liu didn't stop walking. Similar scenes had happened many times recently. The second coming of the mutant era had caused the pattern of the world to change. More and more mutants were appearing. Li Changgong's suspicions were also heightened, so he began to go on a rampage to capture talented mutants. No one knew exactly what his intentions were. As for Sha Liu's heart, a storm was brewing at this time. The news that Sha Liu had received the transfer order went viral, and many people were incomparably shocked when they found out about this news. The number 2 person in the army, second only to Li Changgong as an epsilon-level mutant, could be said to be the main force guarding Chang'an City. For him to be transferred out of Chang'an City and go to a remote northwestern military town was indeed very puzzling. However, since it was an order from the Ministry of War directly issued by the Supreme Commander, the people could only privately whispering underneath their voices. This kind of internal struggle was something they had seen time and time again. Even someone as powerful as Sha Liu would be exiled when it was discovered that he could potentially threaten Li Changgong's position. The courtyard of Sha Liu's house. He sat under the eaves of the house in a military uniform, looking out the window at the falling snow. The dark green shirt fit his body, and he looked tall and brave, a born soldier. A knock sounded outside the courtyard. Sha Liu's wife rushed to open the door, and after a burst of pleasantries, two people walked in. A tall and sturdy bald and strong man, and a thin man with a figure as straight as a gun. Among the 5 extreme gods of war, North Pole War God, Chen Jiahao, and South Pole War God, Di Fei. Both of them were Sha Liu's best comrades, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that their relationship was that of brothers. The two were received by Sha Liu's wife in the courtyard, and after serving up tea and refreshments, Mrs. Xiao closed the door knowingly and left. Sha Liu twisted his head to look at them and did not say anything. "Big brother, I heard that you're going to be dispatched to the northernmost ebony town?" Chen Jiahao came up and asked directly. "No way? You're really going to go to that shithole of a place and drink the northwest wind every day? It's a place where you could be frozen into an icy lump the moment you go out." The two sat down beside Sha Liu. Di Fei looked at him and said seriously, "Or else go talk to the commander again. With your ability, you shouldn't go to a place like that." Sha Liu suddenly smiled at his words. He picked up the teapot in his hand and the steaming tea was poured into a cup. As he sipped the tea, he said, "The commander personally gave the order to me. Do you guys think it's possible to change it?" Di Fei suddenly stood up in excitement. "If you can't do it alone, then a few of us will go together. Call out Chiu Koan and Baijan. Our 5 extreme gods of war are the commander's beloved ones, following him around for many years and always fighting for him in the south and north. Now how could he do such a thing to his big brother who has gotten the most credit?" Di Fei's voice grew louder and his tone was extremely agitated. "Di Fei, lower your voice. If you keep talking like this, the entire Chang'an city can hear you." Sha Liu beckoned towards him, and only then did Di Fei reluctantly sit down. While Chen Jiahao, who looked like a silly big man in general, said to Sha Liu very calmly at this moment, "Commander is like a different person now. In recent times, I've heard that he started to go on a rampage to capture talented mutants and then sent those people to who knows where. For those around him, he no longer trusts them either. Many of our old buddies have been transferred from their source positions. Even you, big brother, have been sent to the border wilderness. If this continues, I'm just afraid that one day our lives won't be safe." Sha Liu listened silently as he sipped his tea, but his eyes were as sharp as a falcon's. He stared at a branch of plum blossom in the corner of the wall in the middle of the courtyard. It grew out from amongst the cracks in the stone. The branch was slender, but the flower was beautiful. Di Fei lowered his voice. "Big brother, are you really planning to go to the border wilderness to retire? If you really go, wait until your prestige in the army is completely diluted. I'm afraid he'll go after you. He doesn't trust anyone right now and has been trying to find ways to get stronger. You're the only Epsilon in the Northwest region. He can't tolerate you. I've even heard that he is worried about a second you appearing, which is why he is arresting talented mutants in large numbers. It's even possible that those people have already been executed. Big brother." Di Fei looked at the impassive Sha Liu and looked anxious. "We can't just sit around and wait for death." Only then did Sha Liu turn his head to look at Di Fei. Suddenly, he laughed. "You brat, you always have an adventurous look about you." However, he squeezed the cup in his hand, and inside his eyes, a flame blazed like a burning field's wildfire. "It's also time to make a move." Sha Liu was ready to leave Chang'an City. For the past 3 years, as the strongest amongst the 5 extreme gods of war and the one with the most military achievements, he had always had a very good reputation and connections in the military. However, due to the fact that he had been dispatched to the border wilderness, many people did not dare to come to his farewell banquet. Still, Chen Jiahao and Di Fei organized a private party at their home in their name. Those who came to the party were all officers in Sha Liu's army who had always been on relatively good terms. They also had a special identity, that of the former commander Jing Yongxiu's old troops. The banquet was very sumptuous, and all sorts of treasured drinks were brought out by the three of them to entertain these fellow officers. At first, the people were still a bit restrained, but as the wine went down their bellies, gradually they all let go. General Shao, when I think about when we were together, how glorious it was. You were in charge of the 5 extreme gods of war and the subordinate special forces. I was in charge of the 6th unit of the city defense force. It's just a pity that now, hey. The one who spoke was a Mediterranean general who used to be the general of the 6th part of the city defense army. But then the Wulwan Empire invaded and the city defense army was almost completely wiped out. Later on, the force was reorganized and he was stripped of most of his authority. Nowadays, he was at the most disillusioned time in his life, just like Sha Liu. Sha Liu held the bottle of wine in his hand, and seeing that the wine was almost gone, he gave Difei a look. Difei walks over and locks the doors of the box from the inside. This box was huge, with 3 tables set up inside, and 20 to 30 people were all backbones of the military. Bang! The sound of the doors closing was not too loud or too small, just enough for everyone to hear. The people in the box all looked at Difei, and an officer, who was red in the face from drinking, pointed at Difei with a bottle of wine and asked, "General D, what are you doing by closing the door?" At this time, Sha Liu stood up, and next to him, Chen Jiahao also stood up. The 5 extreme gods of war represented the highest combat power in the entire northwest region below Li Changgong. The 3 of them stood in front of the box, bringing a great oppressive force to the crowd and gradually making them notice that today's banquet was not quite ordinary. Sha Liu walked to the center of everyone and first swept a circle of the crowd with a serious gaze before slowly opening his mouth. Calling all of you here today is not for the purpose of practicing on me. In recent times, there is no need for me to say more about what has happened in the region, you are all aware of it. The commander no longer trusts anyone, even me, Sha Liu, is going to be purged by him. And everyone here was promoted by the former commander-in-chief, Marshal Jin Yongxiu. We are all considered his faction. After I leave, I'm sure all of you won't have a good time for the rest of your lives. Originally, the people present still had some disgruntled expressions, but after listening to Sha Liu's words, their faces became grave. Many people lowered their heads and furrowed their brows as their drunkenness dissipated quite a bit. At this time, the very senior Mediterranean general who had just spoken sternly rebuked, General Sha Liu. "Do you know what you're doing right now?" Sha Liu immediately replied, "Of course I know what I'm doing." He had a hawk-like arrogance in his gaze. "The situation has been laid out before us. We, the former commander's old troops, can no longer be tolerated by Li Changgong. He has now gone on a rampage and started arresting people without any reason. Over the course of 3 years, the authority in the hands of all of you has been repeatedly stripped away." He looked at the Mediterranean Sea. "Brother Chen, before, you were a general in charge of 20,000 troops. How much power do you still have in your hands now? The best thing that could happen to you now would be nothing more than resigning from your position before it's too late, and then living in your assigned house for the rest of your life. It might even be difficult to live to the end of your life." He pointed to the others in the room, reading their names one by one. Lieutenant Colonel He Chihuan, Major Mazun, General Tianhuan Zhang. You've all been labeled as former commanders-in-chief, just like me. Before, with a few of us around, he pointed to the 3 of them, Li Changgong wouldn't have done anything to you yet. But I've been sent to the border wilderness. What will happen to you all then? Have you thought about it? The people at the scene were silent after a few words, and their hearts were getting more and more agitated. Several officers picked up the bottles in their hands and directly poured them into their stomachs. They certainly understood what Sha Liu had said. Saying such treacherous words, "Sha Liu, do you want to get us all killed?" Mediterranean Sea violently stood up, his face red with excitement. "I can pretend that I didn't hear what you said today, and I didn't come here today," he said and was about to leave. Sha Liu called out to him from behind, "Are you really willing to give up everything you have now, even your life? Walking out of this doors, Li Changgong may not let you go. Cooperating with us now is your only way out." Mediterranean Sea's figure stopped violently. His hand was placed on the full handle and no one stopped him. After hesitating for a long time, he turned his head and stared dead at Sha Liu. This is a rebellion. A lot of people will die, and everyone around us will die because of us. Sha Liu threw the wine glass in his hand to the ground as he stared. Failure is what makes it a rebellion, victory is a revolution, isn't it? Although the night of revolution is short, its glory is long-lasting. This glory, I, Sha Liu, will not enjoy it alone. Some of the young soldiers had already been spoken to by Sha Liu. They were only in their 30s and still had a long life ahead of them. Who would want to be sidelined to the edge of power? Even with Li Changgong's current insanity, they didn't know that they would die in the hands of his gendarmes one day. Mediterranean Sea grimaced and pointed at Sha Liu, Di Fei, and Chen Jiahao and cursed bitterly. You three lunatics. You want to die yourselves, why must you drag us down? Yelling about revolution, what are you going to fight Li Changgong with? He stomped forward and grabbed Sha Liu's collar, his eyebrows falling back and his eyes cracking. In the era of the mutants, a single powerful mutant can change the entire situation of a war. At that time, who'll stop Li Changgong? Sha Liu stared at the Mediterranean Sea, and suddenly he smiled. General Chen, that means as long as I can stop Li Changgong, you'll be willing to stand on our side, right? He smiled broadly, but there was a dark light flickering in his eyes. Mediterranean's face revealed an incomparably surprised expression. General Shao. Does that mean that you? Sha Liu gripped the wine bottle tightly, lowered his head, and said in a deep voice, 3 years ago, Li Changgong relied on force and committed a rebellion. It killed Commander Zheng Yongxiu. Since that time, I have been waiting for today. Don't worry, I'm confident in dealing with him. I'm not a fool, I won't be stupid enough to seek death before I have enough strength. Mediterranean's expression changed, his expression began to hesitate, but there was a clear movement in his eyes. The other officers also began to whisper. Sha Liu pointed at Chen Jiahao and Di Fei, you guys don't believe me, could it be that the three of us are standing together and you still don't believe me? Chen Jiahao and Di Fei didn't need to say anything, they just firmly straightened their backs and stood behind Sha Liu, showing their attitude. Now, the crowd's mentality had obviously changed. Mediterranean Sea swallowed his saliva and walked over to hold Sha Liu's hands. If that's the case, then it's worth doing. Commander Zheng Yongxiu's revenge deserves to be avenged by us old men. It was night. Baijian came to Li Changgong's office to report. Commander, this evening, Sha Liu gathered a group of officers to feast at his home. Possibly, they want to start a rebellion. Baijian lowered his voice, his gaze grave. Li Changgong was reading a book at the moment, the autobiography of the leader of Silas Li surname more than half a century ago, Managing the Future. Hearing Baijian's words, his eyes rolled upwards, but he snorted in disbelief, impossible. Sha Liu isn't that stupid to make a mess? Nowadays, everywhere up and down the northwest region are my people. In terms of force, I'm even the number one. Even if he's a madman, it's impossible for everyone else to be mad. Baijian saw that Li Changgong wasn't worried at all, and immediately became a bit anxious. Commander, I don't think you should underestimate Sha Liu. Bang! Before he could say the words that followed, Li Changgong's book slammed heavily on the table. Li Changgong stared at Baijian. Underestimate Sha Liu? Do I need to think highly of him? It's just a son of a bitch who comes from a family of lower-level officers and has that much talent. Do you want to compare him to me?